Good evening, good evening. Hello, 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 everyone. My mic was muted, so excuse me for that. But welcome to another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I'm glad that you all had an opportunity to take time out of your schedule to really, really enjoy this show and to enjoy this broadcast. And again, we air every Tuesday evening from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have a very exciting show for you all this evening. We are wrapping up the academic school year for a lot of the school systems, around the county and around the state and even around the country. So right now, a lot of people are in the vacation mode. A lot of people are ready for summer. A lot of people are preparing for warm weather. A lot of people are wrapping up their studies, but we're in the middle of the election season for the state of Maryland, and we have a school board, a Baltimore City School Board candidate here with us, Ms. Salimah Jasani, who I met just last month at an event for the reelection campaign and birthday celebration of Delegate Stephanie Smith, whom we've had on the show. And it was phenomenal meeting her. Miss Ashley Esposito wasn't able to make it with us this evening, so we will catch her at another time. But for now, we are going to we're going to introduce Miss Salimah Jasani here with us to talk about her work for her campaign. So she's going to be speaking with us about her work as an educator, her work as a community organizer, and what led her to running for one of the historical seats for the Baltimore City School Board. And we'll learn a lot about how the school system works within the city of Baltimore, and we'll learn a lot about the responsibilities that you have as a member of the school board. Because I think that oftentimes when we talk about education and when we talk about the work that's being done between the school systems, the parents, the advocates, the community organizers and activists, and even with the students and parents, I think that it requires a village in order for it to work. I think that oftentimes people forget about what their roles and responsibilities are, and oftentimes people forget how important it is to stay active and to stay involved and not just cast blame or be- believe that it's just one group's responsibility or one person's responsibility for the well-being and for the education of the future generations of leaders. So I think that Ms. Salimah Jasani has definitely demonstrated how much of a leader she is within the city of Baltimore, and I think that she is going to do a great job at sharing that with us this evening. So Ms. Salima, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to appear on the show this evening. I know that we're in a time crunch right now. I know that the primary election is a month away, and early voting actually begins probably in about a month. So I just wanted you to come on and share your story and tell the listeners how you got to where you are and like what led you into running to the school board. Because I think that running for a position, in any form of government, or even if you're on a school board, or if you are in the position of influence, and if you have a responsibility to really serve the community. Sometimes it can be really difficult understanding what the needs are, and in terms of connecting the resources to the needs in the community. Sometimes it can be very difficult in order to figure that out. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to running for the position, for one of the positions, one of the historical seats on the Baltimore City School Board? Because I know you spoke about it at the ice cream social a couple of weeks ago, but we are going to dig a little deeper here. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on the show and for helping to educate people about this election. Um, so the question of what brings me here, it's interesting. I have been telling people throughout this campaign that if you had told me a year ago that this is what I would be doing, that I would be running for election, I wouldn't have believed you. So in a sense, it's not like this has been a part of some kind of grand plan for me, but every single one of my life experiences, both personal and professional, in some way, I feel like has led me to this moment. But the biggest one has been being a teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools. So I was a special education teacher at the high school level, and right here in Baltimore. And during the time that I was in the classroom, I loved meeting and getting to know my brilliant, amazing Baltimore City students. Um, and what I started to realize is that our students have so much potential, and it is often the adults that are decisions, policy decisions impacting our schools that are not doing so in a way that is providing our students with equitable opportunities to succeed. And so what I started doing as a teacher is I started community organizing, because I found that that was really what was bringing me energy. Is, within my classroom, I could help to provide my students with the skills and knowledge and even things like self-advocacy that we don't normally think of as being part of an educational curriculum. But the other things that they needed in order to really thrive, things like access to field trips in different parts of the city and even outside of the city, things like access to things where, so all of my students had disabilities, access to settings where students, where they could interact with students who didn't all have disabilities, right? So being in an integrated rather than a segregated setting, even having adequate funding to be able to have experiences that enhance their learning. A lot of times decisions were being made so that those things weren't happening. So I fought. I would teach all day, and then after the school day, I would go to City Hall, or I would go to the school board, or I would even go to Annapolis to the State House. Or in more recent years, I would go to the Curtin Commission when they were still conducting their stakeholder engagement process, and I would testify on behalf of my students. And in many cases, I would bring my students with me because I believe that our students are the experts in the decisions that impact them the most. And so I also was a school organizing fellow. So I did community organizing within the school setting and helped to teach my students what are your organizing and advocacy skills that you need to fight for what you want to see happen in your lives. And I found that that work was really bringing me a lot of energy because we were getting wins. There was very early on in my career, I wrote an op-ed for the Baltimore Sun about where, where was the school board spending city schools as money and how does that translate into employee positions? And then I brought a group of people in collaboration and community to a school board meeting and fought for increased transparency, and we won. And being able to see the impact that had on the community, on our students, that really made me feel like the fight was worth it. And so I decided that I wanted to study this further. I wanted to think about, at the systems level, what were the policies that needed to be changed or put into place in order to benefit our students. So I decided to go back to graduate school and earn a degree in public affairs. And I focused that degree on education and child poverty and issues that, in fact, impact our young people. And as a component of that graduate coursework, I had to do a fellowship. And so I actually did my fellowship in the office of Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the US House of Representatives. And while in that position, I actually focused my capstone project on how can we fund early intervention services for infants and toddlers with disabilities, and how does that impact our work later on. And so that was also an amazing experience. And then I realized, okay, I've worked at the local level, I've gotten to work at the federal level. What I really want to understand is what happens at the state level, because so much education policy is actually made at the state level. And so the next job that I had after I completed my graduate program and my fellowship was I was actually working in partnership with the State Department of Education here in Maryland in our special education division. And I supported directors of special education from various counties and public school systems around Maryland. And I worked with them on, okay, what can you do with the resources you have in order to achieve transformational change in your school system for students with disabilities? And then finally, as of a couple months ago, I have been working as an education consultant. So now I work with districts around the country, and I help them think about, how do we solve our most pressing problems? And some of those problems are things that impact Baltimore City schools, like teacher retention, like personalizing learning for students, like enhancing equity, like recruiting diverse teachers. So I'm doing all of this work, and I thought to myself, Baltimore needs this kind of thinking, particularly thinking around how do we best support our students with disabilities, our English learners, our students that are kind of at the margins of the conversations that we've been having. Because I don't believe that our city and our school district has done the best job of keeping those students' needs in mind. And I think there was this moment where someone said to me, you know, you could be that person. You could be the one that serves on the board and makes sure that we are thinking about student voice, that we're thinking about community voice. You could apply your experience and your expertise working with systems around the country to your own city. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to serve my own city. I want to be able to take all of these experiences that I have and continue fighting for my students, but in a position where I would actually be able to take their voices and amplify them and create real change instead of only being the one who's demanding change from other people that are in power. So that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again for sharing that. It was a great backstory. I think that oftentimes, again, we think about, what we're doing in the community, as community organizers, and even when you are in a position of influence, you often think about what you're doing, but sometimes we forget to realize how impactful we really can be when we step out, when we take a look at, the circumstances, and when we take a look at what the issues are, and when we try to figure out how to solve them, we have to remember that it begins with us. Of course, any type of change, if you want to be um, any type of change agent, it has to begin with you. So it's great that you've had the opportunity to study, um, you know study your city, study public affairs, and you've had an opportunity to work with many legislators, not just locally but on the national level, to tackle many of the problems. And oftentimes, again, these opportunities, they don't come often, and it's really important for people to take advantage of opportunities to really, really get involved in their community, because the children are our future. I mean, it's cliche for a lot of people to say now, but it's true. And oftentimes, again, people just rely heavily on the school systems to do all of the work, or the educators to do all of the work. But it requires everyone to work together and to really figure out how we can close the gaps that exist. I've learned about the sociology of education through a course I took at UMBC, and I was able to learn about how many communities are actually marginalized each and every year because they don't get the funding, or they don't get the other resources that they need in order to prosper. Many Black and Brown communities, and this doesn't just apply to the city of Baltimore. This is around the world. The resources that communities of color need so that their children can prosper. Because education is the foundation for everything. It's a foundation for everything. You move forward in your life based upon the education that you have, the skills that you have. That depends on whether or not you're going to get a good job that pays well, or if you're going to be able to build a successful career out of what you're passionate about. So education is a huge part of all of our lives, because we need skills. We need to learn how to read and write. We need to learn how to again, figure out what our passions are and figure out where our place is. And I think that oftentimes people who are a part of marginalized communities, they're left out of the equation because people don't really value the resources that they can use in order to help others. They just often sometimes use it to amplify themselves, or people that they really deem as more deserving. But everyone, again, should be, all of the resources should be distributed equally between all of the school systems, and as it pertains to the city of Baltimore, every single community, has needs. Every single school system, every single school in each community has needs that need to be met, and it's the board's responsibility to make sure that everyone is having those needs met. It's important to connect the resources with the needs, because even the best neighborhoods have issues. So it's important for people to remember that there's no such thing as a bad neighborhood or a bad school, or a good neighborhood or a good school. All of the schools have needs, and all of the schools have resources. So it's great that you have had an opportunity to really dig deep and figure out what those are, and you've been able to use that, use your story and use your experience in order to build your campaign. So you kind of answered my first few questions. Um, we're going to take a step back a little more. So what or who inspired you to become an educator, or what or who inspired you to pursue careers in education and community organizing? So I know I remember reading from your bio a little bit about your home life. So could you talk to the listeners and speak about your experience, like your story, growing up, and how you managed to build a career in education and community organizing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was born in India, and I moved to the United States at a pretty young age. I actually lived in three different countries by the time I was 3 years old, and I think that it was sort of drilled into me from a very young age that the reason that was my early childhood was because of the immense value that my parents put on having access to a quality education. And so, they left behind their families in India, everything that they had ever known, in order to come to the United States and to start building a life for us in a place where they knew that we would have access to a high quality education. So it was always drilled in me as this extremely important um, just thing to be able to have. And actually, there were many moments throughout my childhood that that really sort of centered around the privilege of being able to either knowing the right people or being in a position where I was able to access an education. So I actually wrote an article that was published a couple years ago called it was about the how I ended up being able to attend pre-K because when I was very young, my parents worked at a gas station, and I used to kind of play outside by the gas pumps. I was 3, 4 years old, and the local principal of our pre-K ended up coming to the gas station, seeing me and being horrified. And she, went to my dad and she said, whose daughter is that? And he said, oh, she's my daughter. And the principal, her name was Miss Jatan. My family's still very connected to her. She said, what is she doing there? The gas pump is no place for a child to play. Like that child should be in pre-K. And she helped my dad get me enrolled in pre-K. Um, and it was an incredible experience in my childhood because we know from the research that students who attend pre-K, there are huge dividends in their life outcomes later on in life than students who don't attend pre-K and go to kindergarten. So that was sort of, this like early formative experience that for my family made it very clear that education was super important. And then I think as I grew older, I kept having these experiences where I suddenly realized as a child that not everyone had access to the same education, right? And so, I went to, I attended this really small rural public school district in East Texas, very high poverty. And I went there from kindergarten through eighth grade. And then after eighth grade, my parents actually ended up moving my brother and me away from that school because they knew that the high school wasn't ranked well, which that's an immense privilege, right? The fact that my parents were able to move us. But to give you a sense of the difference in education that I experienced, in my graduating class, what would have been my graduating class in that East Texas school district, of the 50 or so girls, teenagers that were in that class, 13 of them got pregnant and dropped out of high school and didn't finish getting their high school diploma because that was presented as sort of the only option for a young woman, a teenager. Once you graduate from high school, you're just going to make a baby, so you might as well start earlier. There was no emphasis at all on earning a higher education. It was out of the question for many people. We didn't have access to a good college that was, close enough to this town. And this happened to my best friend as well. Growing up, she was one of those girls who dropped out of high school, and and got pregnant in high school, and now she has this beautiful daughter who is she is making sure that has access to a high quality education, and so that she has better life outcomes. But there were all of these moments, growing up where it became clear that it's not enough to have an education. There is extreme inequity, extreme disparities in the quality of education that people are able to have. And it's directly correlated to whether or not they're living in poverty. We know, of course, because of historical segregation and redlining, that Black students and Latinx students are much more likely to be in poverty and to have inequitable access, right? To not have access to a high quality education. And so learning about all of those things, both personally and then in undergrad, as a sociology major, I also took a sociology of education class, like you mentioned earlier. I think learning sort of the academic piece around that as well, this like I couldn't imagine doing anything else. There were other things that I had thought about doing as a career. At one point I wanted to be a lawyer. When I was much younger, I wanted to be an astronaut. But those were all sort of these things that sounded like cool jobs. But teaching, as a teacher, I really felt like that was my calling. Like I had so many moments where I just, even when things were really hard, and they were really hard a lot of the time, I felt like this is what I was meant to do. And now, I'm not in the classroom. I believe that I will be back in the classroom someday because I do believe that was my calling. But the work that I do in education generally, I just can't imagine a better fit. And I think the one other area that I'm really, really interested in that is connected to education is disability justice. So I think I'm most interested in the intersection of those two pieces, how our education system and how all of our systems that impact people with disabilities kind of intersect. And so that's just always been where my passion has lied. So long answer, but those are some of the formative experiences that kind of led me to pursuing this path.
Yes, and thanks for sharing that. And it's very important because I think that your story matters, especially when you're in the classroom and when you're speaking to students, when you're speaking to young people in general. Young people want to feel connected to people that they look up to, people who they view as being role models, and people, because school is not just a place that you go in order to learn and or to just get a good grade and to just pass. School is supposed to be an environment where you feel comfortable. Um, I think that it should be presented as a safe haven, not just something that you do 5 days a week, for about 8 hours. I think that oftentimes kids who don't have a safe haven at home, they want to, they need an outlet. They need a place. They need to be in a place where they can really express themselves and be comfortable and be secure with who they are and with who they're around. It's important to build those connections. I think that when you're pursuing a career in education, I think that when you make connections and when you act as that positive role model and that mentor to that student, I think that stays with them, and I think that that matters, and I think that's what they want more than anything. But because oftentimes when people um, don't pay attention to the most critical moments in students' lives, like right now, we hear a lot about how a lot of the students in the city of Baltimore, how they're not being afforded an equal amount of opportunities as students in other districts and in other counties, and other cities, because again, the right resources are not connecting to the needs of the students, because people need to identify what the resources are in order to figure out how they can supply those needs. The needs and the resources work hand in hand. So again, we hear about many of the disparities, and we hear about the inequities, and how marginalized communities are constantly um, faced with discriminatory practices in all forms. But again, it's our responsibility to connect those resources with the needs that are supposed to be met in the community. But again, it takes strong leadership and strong advocates in order to make that happen. And again, I know that I've heard, because I have several people in my network who are educators. I know that being an educator is not easy. I do realize that it is a calling, because again, you're in a position of influence, and you are in a position to where you're supposed to, of course, build up your students, give them that confidence that they may not have, or they may not get from another adult. Again, they have to feel like they trust you in order to feel comfortable with you, and in your presence. And they should always be in a position to come to you if they have a problem. And I think that, again, in a position of influence, I think that it should be used in order to do great things and to make an impact, and not to just fulfill your own purpose, or to just have status, but also, of course, to make a difference, make that impact that the community needs. So my next question is, this, as we we take a detour and go back to your campaign. I was going to ask you, who has been your mentor throughout the course of the election season? So I know that we all need mentors, especially when we're taking a big leap of faith and we're embarking on a journey. And I think that throwing your hat in for a seat in an election, I think that's a very bold step. I think it's a very courageous step. But again, you still need a mentor in your corner, someone who's gone through the process, someone who's much more familiar with the process, and someone who can help you avoid the pitfalls and the bumps in the road. Not to say that you won't have any, but they can help you. They can help guide you. So who have been your mentors? Who's been in your corner throughout the entire time? Who do you look
Yeah,
up to?
I think I look up to a lot of people, and a lot of people have kind of served in that mentor role for me. And a lot of them have done it, with knowing that they're not going to receive any sort of public, name recognition for it or anything like that, because they not only do they believe in me as a candidate, but they also believe in the importance of supporting candidates from underrepresented backgrounds to run for office. So, I have a group of people that have been supporting me from an organization called Ismailis Rise Up. And I am a member of the Ismaili Muslim faith community. And Ismailis Rise Up is an organization that sort of focuses on, um, ensuring that the Ismaili community is engaged civically and politically. And they're doing an amazing job of supporting me. And a big reason for that is that Asian Americans are the most underrepresented group in politics in elected office. And that actually surprised me when I found that out. But there's so many reasons for it to be the case. One of them, though, is that we tend to see ourselves in positions where there are a lot of other people who look like us, right? This is one of the reasons why so many districts are focusing right now on hiring and retaining teachers of color, and specifically Black teachers, because as a sort of proportion of the overall teaching force, it is predominantly white women. And so for a student to go through your education, a lot of times we'll hear stories about students who kind of have their first Black teacher, and it totally shifts their perspective of who can be in that position. So for Asian Americans, there's not that many role models for us in elected office, and certainly not on school boards. In fact, in my community, in the Ismaili community, I know of one other person, actually went to college with him, who serves on a school board, but he has a specific district seat. I don't know of anyone who has sort of a citywide school board seat like this. And so it's been really important to have mentors in that community that have been able to say, you can do this thing, even though no one with your background has ever done it before, right? I would be the first. And I think a lot about, I have this T-shirt from Kamala Harris from when President Biden was running his campaign, and it's a picture of Vice President Harris as a young child, and the caption says, "The first but not the last." And I think having mentors from my community saying you can be the first and you will not be the last has been super powerful. I think there's a lot of other mentors in my life. Again, not all of them are people that I can sort of name, because I don't think that they would want to be named. And I think that that speaks to how much they are doing this out of belief and kindness and commitment and not out of any sort of personal recognition. But there's one person in particular who is a Black woman who is in a leadership position that has been so helpful to me throughout my career. And she was actually the one who called me and said, "You need to run for this position. Your voice needs to be heard on the board." And there were so many times that I almost backed out. Um, and there was one moment where I sort of texted her and I said, like, "Do you really think I should do this?" And she sent me this paragraph of like, "Yes, of course you should do this. What are you talking about?" And honestly, that turned the tide for me. Like knowing that she believed in me as someone who has done things that I can only hope to do one day. Um, that was really tremendous. I also, we have a lot of progressive momentum in our campaign from people in Baltimore City that are interested in seeing a school board that is not afraid to make decisions that may not be that may be controversial, but they promote equity. They ensure that we are moving in a direction that benefits all of our students. And so a lot of those people have served as mentors as well. And one additional person that I want to shout out, I don't know if mentor is quite the right word, but my husband has been such an important supporter of me during this process. I literally could not have done this without him. I was actually told by someone that so one of the people who's supporting me, he actually supports a number of women candidates, all candidates, but a lot of his candidates are women across the country who are running for office. And one thing that he said to me is that, a lot of women who run who have partners, especially male partners, um, for the hardest part about running for them is the fact that they don't have their partner support, because running a campaign is so hard. I honestly was not prepared for how hard this was going to be. I work and then I do campaign things, and that's about it. Like I'm certainly not, cooking and cleaning and taking care of my household right now. And so having a partner who is not only supportive in doing those things, but is also, helping me figure out like how do I cut turf for my, for canvassing? How do I set up a bank account for my campaign? What did the campaign finance laws say? How do I submit this report? Like he's handling so much and has been so supportive. And every time I start to feel discouraged or dejected, he's there to say, it's okay. And he believes in me. And just recently I had a Facebook ad out and people started commenting on it, and there was one person who said like, "You just lost my vote," because I thought I took a brave position on a particular issue. At least I think it was a brave position based on my own experience and what I think our priorities should be. And then this person said, "You lost my vote," and and that's a part of it, right? You're not going to win over everyone, but for someone like me who is a people pleaser and wants everyone to understand where I'm coming from, because I know that I have good intentions, right? But not everyone believes that, which they shouldn't, because not everyone who's running for office does. But when things like that happen, it's so important to have a partner or a mentor or someone who you can turn to who can say, "It's okay, you're not going to win them all, but I still believe in you."
Yes, yes, absolutely, and that's fantastic. We all need mentors when we're making courageous steps like this. And I can't imagine, running a campaign for the past several months. I know it's been, it's been a lot, but I know that whenever we take a big step, or whenever we're pursuing something, when we're going after something, we don't want to experience burnout. But sometimes when things don't look the way we anticipate, sometimes we do feel discouraged, and sometimes we do want to throw in the towel and just call it quits. But it is nice to have someone in your corner when you feel like falling, and when you feel like things are hopeless, so that they can help bring you back and help you see the big picture. So that's really nice, and I think that again, that motivation is what, and that drive is what the school board needs for one of their leaders. Not someone who is, of course, looking to please the voters with decisions that are politically popular, but what's fair and equitable, like you had just mentioned. And I think that that's how we're going to really gain the community's trust back. I think that the trust has been broken within the city, because a lot of the residents in the city of Baltimore don't trust the leaders in many capacities, for various reasons. But I think that that trust needs to be restored. And I think that, of course, it's going to take a while for the community to really, really trust the leadership, but I don't think it's impossible. I think that, of course, we all have to start somewhere, and we all, anything is possible when you really work towards, when you work at it, it's possible. So I think that, of course, it's going to take a while for the trust to be restored, but I think that when you take baby steps, and when you stick to your overall purpose and not let anyone, sway you one way or another, I think that it can be done. And I think that that's what the students need, in the city of Baltimore. I think that's what the students need, from their mentors, their coaches, their educators. Even if they don't have a mom or dad at home, or some family member to turn to, they still have the community. The community should be the backbone. It's not just about the parents, it's not just about the school systems, it's not just about the educators, but it's about the village. So kids need that village. And again, I think that's what the students in the city of Baltimore need, because it requires all of us working together. It requires all of us to make a difference, and it requires all of us to do our part. So let's see. Okay, so I know that you talked a little bit about, your husband being supportive, and several other people who, encouraged you to run for this board position. But could you tell us a little bit about the history behind the school board? Because people know the school board, people know that it's there, but a lot of people don't really understand what the responsibilities are, because they see the mayor, they see the CEO of the school systems, and they see the board. But there are two new historical seats that are going to be a part of this board during this election season. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Why is that so important for people to understand? Because the school board has been there for a long time, but again, the transparency and accountability hasn't been the best, in the recent years. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, the school board has been fully appointed, and Baltimore City has been the only jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that has had a fully appointed school board, which has been the case for years and years and years. So this will be the first time ever that Baltimore City voters actually get to vote for two elected members of the school board. And these elected members will be added in addition to the existing appointed members of the board. So, so it is a very historic election. It's an opportunity for the community to have a voice. It's an opportunity for us to democratize a process that has previously made it so that um, only certain people were able to get on the board, and you had to be in recent years appointed by the mayor, or previously you could have been appointed by the governor as well. So it is. It's an exciting time, and I think what happens this election and who we elect and what they do once they're on the board is really going to set the tone for what happens in terms of policy making about the board in future years. So as far as what the board actually does, um, the school board has a tremendous degree of power and authority over city schools. So they have budgeting power. They get to make decisions along with the CEO about where we spend our money. They also have governance power. So they have, they get to decide who we hire, and that includes the CEO. They have strategic planning power. This is a power that is super exciting to me, because this is literally what I do in my day job. Is I support districts with strategic planning in a way that's responsive and engages the community. So that means that they get to set the strategic direction for the district, decide what are our big goals, and then decide what programs and initiatives are we going to not only start, but also fund, right, with our budget in order to support those big goals. And they also have a great degree of power over things like who do we sign contracts with as city schools. We have many external contracts. What grants are city schools applying for, and do they get approved? This is one piece that not many people know that the board can do that I'm extremely interested in, because when I worked at the state level, I was actually one of the people who was responsible for reading plans, implementation plans, and grant applications that Maryland school districts made and that went to the state to be approved. But before they ever got to the state, they needed to be approved by the school board. And in many cases, I thought to myself, if I had been on the school board, I would have said, okay, we need to pause before we let this go any further, before we spend this money. Here are some questions. How are we going to make sure that these funds actually go towards a program or an initiative that is going to lead to outcomes for our students? If we're paying for professional development, are we supporting it with coaching to make sure that it actually results in, sort of follow-up actions by teachers? We have plans for disproportionality. So we're disproportionately suspending students of color and students with disabilities. We have been doing that for years and years and years, and we have this bucket of funding that we have to set aside to address that problem, but we're still doing it. So, the school board is the one that kind of gets to ask those questions of the people in city schools who are enacting all of these plans. Like, what are we doing? What can we do differently? What does our progress monitoring look like? And how will we obtain the results that we want to see? So again, it's a tremendous amount of authority. Now, granted, it is a board, right? So it's a group of people. It's not that one individual person on the school board can make this decision. And the Baltimore City School Board actually makes all of its decisions based on majority rule for the most part. But that's another reason why these 2 elected seats are really important, because I think that there are a number of board members who might disagree with a lot of decisions that have been made in the past, but they don't necessarily have the authority or the majority to be able to sway things. But if you add 2 additional school board members, and especially if those board members are more willing to take bold stances, to be brave in the decisions that we make, to further engage the community, to make sure that we're amplifying student, educator, and family voice. There are others on the board where I think together we could make a majority and really shift the way that our school board operates.
Yes, thank you for educating us about the jobs and the responsibilities that the school board members have within the city of Baltimore. Because again, I think that people know that the board is there, but a lot of people don't understand what the board does every day, because people look at TV and they think that all of these decisions go through the mayor, the CEO, and that's that. But people don't really understand how complicated all of these policies and rules can really be when they're actually at the table, and then when they're sitting there and when they're discussing this. So again, I thank you again for talking about the responsibilities that the school board has. And again, it's a very influential board. But again, you know, a lot of influence that can be used for the good or for the bad. And again, when you focus on the people, because this is what it's about. It's about the people. It's about the community. And in this case, the school board, it should be about the students. Because like you said earlier in the show, the students, their voices matter. So again, the school board members, it should be in their best interest to really, really listen to the students, and even to the teachers, the educators who are in the classrooms with them. They are able to recognize what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what area is lacking and what area needs extra resources. Because again, the needs are different for each and every school, and the needs are different for each and every community. But just because um, may the needs for the resources may not be deemed as important as needs for communities that are considered to be the ones that are thriving, or the ones that do have the school systems where they have teachers that get paid well, or they have access to after school programs, or if they have access to this or access to that. All of the schools, again, it should be fair and equitable resources across the board. So it's great that you had a chance to elaborate a little bit on that, because again, people just think that people just see the board, and people just see that it's there, but people just think that the mayor gets to decide, you know, what stays and what goes, and the same for CEO, and that's not the case. So I'm glad you gave us a lot of clarity about that. How have you been garnering support from your family, other members of your family, and some of your friends? Because I know you talked a little bit about your husband, but how did your parents feel about you running for a position on the school board? What was their reaction?
Yeah, so it's funny, and this actually kind of ties into educating people about the school board. My dad's first reaction when I told him that I was running was he said, "Oh, that's really great. How much money will you make if you get this new job?" And the reason that's funny and the reason I'm laughing is because school board members in Baltimore don't get paid anything. And so this is a voluntary position. So I think, it was funny because it is a tremendous amount of work. It is not. I think that there might be this perception that those of us who are running for school board are, um, trying to gain some kind of trying to gain a lot from being in that position. And yes, we will gain a great amount of authority and responsibility, but we're still going to have to keep our day jobs. This is not an elected official position in the sense that some other positions are, where it actually becomes your job and you get paid for it. So I think that's just like an important fact for people to know. But so apart from asking that question, I think what my parents realized is that if I'm pursuing something that is not going to pay me, any money, that is actually going to make it so that I'm going to have to take paid time off, or, time off from my current job in order to attend board meetings and that sort of thing, I would be making a lot of sacrifices. And any of us that are elected to this position would be making a lot of sacrifices to serve in this way. So I think for them, it's like, wow, you must really, really care, and you must really want to do this. And I think, for my mom as well, she's heard me talking about my students for years and years and years. And I think for her, it was like, of course you want to do this because you've always fought to make your students' lives better, and this is just one extension of that. So they've been very supportive. We had to have some conversations about, like, this means that I'm not going to be able to spend as much time with you. And, a lot of times my mom calls and I have to send her to voicemail because I'm out canvassing, or I'm, doing an interview, or I'm engaging in some kind of campaigning activity. And that's really hard, but they have been super supportive. And the same for my friends. My friends have really, really helped with fundraising, with volunteering. I have a great support network that not only are they emotionally supportive, which is very important during this time, but they are also giving, sacrificing their weekends, their evenings to join on the campaign trail, to donate themselves, to ask all of their friends and family to donate. So people have been extremely supportive.
Yes, and that's good. And like you had talked about earlier in the show, it's important for your family members and friends to be on board with all of the decisions that you make, because they're a part of the process. They're not the ones running for a seat on the board, but again, it's going to affect your life moving forward. Because again, you have to attend board meetings, you have more responsibilities, and you are obligated to people, to people other than your family and for your friends. You're going to be responsible for students within this throughout the entire city of Baltimore. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of sacrifice, like you said, and that requires everyone to be on board, and that requires for people to just come to a place where they understand. And again, and not make it personal, and not feel like they're losing anything because you're in a new position with new responsibilities and a new atmosphere. So that's very, very important. So before we wrap up the show, we have about 10 minutes, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your message in terms of um, what what your what kind what what kind of quote have you kept in your mind throughout the entire campaign, and what message would you send to anyone, any young person, any student who's pursuing a career in education, or even like with me, I'm pursuing a career in sociology, and I'm in the process of trying to apply for graduate school and pursue my education further because I see the need for change in my community because of what I study and because of the work that I do. So, what message would you send to students who are interested in pursuing a career in education? Because I know that everyone's not equipped to handle all of the responsibilities that come with being an educator, or even I know you said you studied public affairs in grad school, so I think that people need to understand how much sacrifice that is. So, what would be your message to people, young people who are pursuing careers in education or community organizing?
Yeah, I think I actually think that anyone can be equipped. I would never suggest to someone who is looking to pursue a career in education or in public service, don't do it. I think absolutely do it. Um, I think that if everyone thought about the ways in which they could serve those around them and make the world a better place, then we would live in a very different world. But you asked about a quote, and so I actually pulled out my phone because I have one that I've kept as my screensaver on my phone since I started the campaign, and it's a quote from Audre Lorde, and it's when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. And so I think that my advice would be to be fearless in the pursuit of your dreams and in the better world that you want to see. I think there will absolutely be obstacles. Um, you know, the reason that we have educational inequity is because there are people and institutions who have a vested interest in keeping certain populations of people disenfranchised and keeping them marginalized, right? Um, there are people with immense privilege who want to keep it that way. So, what we're talking about when we talk about public service or sociology or education, we're talking about dismantling systems of oppression, and that's really hard and important work. Um, but it's critical, and so you know, I think the something that we talk about a lot in community organizing is that there's different levers of power, right? And one type of power is money, and especially organized money. But another type, and then there's elected leadership, right? Like positional power. So there's financial power, there's positional power. But then the third type of power is organized people. When you join in community with other people who are also striving to dismantle those same oppressions as you have a you that is power. There is power in community. That's why we call it community organizing. There is power in advocating for the world that you want to see. There is power in standing up to people who have positional power or financial power and demanding a change, especially when you do it in community with other people. So my advice would be, be fearless and keep it up.
Yes, excellent. And I love the quote, by the way. I think that is very profound. And I think that's the most appropriate quote to have during this election season, and during this time. So how can people reach out to you if they want to learn more about, the work that you're doing for your campaign and what your plans are, after the campaign season's over, after the election season's over? How can people reach out to you if they want to donate or if they want to learn more about your studies in terms of what you've done prior to you running for election, or if they want to learn how to pursue a career in sociology or even public affairs, like you had mentioned? How can people reach you and contact you for more information on how to donate, how to participate and be a part of this?
Yeah, so my website is salimahjasani.com. that has all of the information about my campaign. It has a button to donate and a button to volunteer. And we really, really need volunteers as we get closer and closer to election day. We need people who can, go to the polls, who can have some signs that they put in. And so if anything that you heard today resonated with you and you'd like to support our campaign, that is a huge, amazing thing that you can do is to go to salimahjasani.com and fill out the button that says volunteer. It'll take you to a survey. If you want to contact me and ask me any questions, you can reach me at info@salimahjasani.com.
All right, fantastic. So again, thank you again for taking time out of your day to come and talk with us. It's very important for people to know how to reach out to all of the people who are running for the campaigns, not just for the school board, but for other positions, in public office. So I think it's very important. I know that the primary is only like about a month away, so I'm trying to remember all the days because I know that early voting it begins next month. So could you remind us when early voting begins and when the primary election day is?
Yep. So early voting is July 7th through July 14th. Primary election is July 19th. It's also not too late to request a mail in ballot if you would prefer to vote by mail. And when you get to the polling location or when you get your ballot, you will see that there are 8 candidates listed for Board of Education at large. It's going to be the last thing on your ballot, no matter what party you're registered with, or even if you're not registered with the party, you can still vote for school board. And of those 8 candidates, you get 2 votes. And so you can fill in 2 bubbles on the ballot next to the 2 candidates that you would like to support. So July 7th through 14th, early voting, and July 19th is primary election day.
Yes. Thank you for that information. Those are important dates to keep in mind. But thank you again, Ms. Salima, for taking time out to speak to us. You've given us a lot of information. The hour went by quickly. So I'm glad that you were able to educate us about the history of the school board, the work that you do in Baltimore City, your passion, your experience, and how that has transcended into you being that change agent and you again making that difference that needs to be made. And again, this is a very important election, so it's important for people to take this seriously. It's important for people to do their research, reach out to their legislators, and work with their community because we are the power. And I say that all the time on my show. Everyone works for us. We have the position to say what we want and what we don't want in our community in every aspect. So again, thanks again. I'm going to let you go, but again, I just wanted to thank you again for your time and for your work. Yes. Thanks again. And I'll definitely touch bases with you and see how everything's going. So I will be keeping in touch with the candidates to see how things are going because you all have something special to offer. But again, I appreciate you for your time and for your work.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Okay, so that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I hope you all enjoyed the show. The hour went by quickly, but I have an important announcement to make. So I'm working towards grad school now. So I made the decision to shoot for grad school now. So a master's program in applied sociology is what I'm shooting for now. So I am going to be working towards preparing for that this summer. I've been working with my professors at UMBC, and I've been working with some of my colleagues and classmates in order to prepare for that whole process. So grad school is definitely on my list now because I'm thinking about not just my family and what this can do for my career, but also how I can make a difference in the community and how much more knowledge and power I'll have in order to make that difference in my community and to make that change that needs to be made. So again, I appreciate you guys and I love you guys for supporting me. I appreciate you guys each and every week. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Next week on the Beauty and Us Radio, we're going to have our post Father's Day special with Mr. Dave Briglio, with Mr. Keith Tooley, and with Mr. Gene Laguerre. So they're going to speak with us about dads. So it's going to be all about dads next week for the post Father's Day special. So make an appointment to meet me back here on June 21st from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on Awesome God Radio. Make sure you subscribe to us on social media. So on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, we're at Awesome God Radio. If you want to reach me directly, again, Nelson E. Brown on Instagram and Twitter, and on Facebook, Nelson Brown, and on LinkedIn, Nelson Brown. And we are also available on Twitch and a couple of other social media channels. This is Nelson E. Brown with the Beauty and Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio, and I will see you all next week. I hope you all enjoy the warm weather. I think next Tuesday is the first official day of summer. So you guys, I hope you enjoy the warm weather. Stay out of the rain, stay out of the thunder, stay away from the lightning. And again, I hope you guys enjoy time with your families this summer. I hope you guys are able to just, stay safe, but, enjoy yourself and just, again, appreciate good times that you have now, because tomorrow isn't promised. And again, take these issues, these social issues seriously. We can't stress that enough. But again, I love you guys and I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next week.